Hey, what is up, you guys? Back at it again with Forget Me Not, Chapter 3 Lost and Found. Finally. Yep, after the few weeks of uploading Ask Stuff, we are finally getting back into this stuff. But yeah, I'm not gonna ramble any longer. Here we go! On the second day, it appeared his luck had not only run out, but had taken a fall down 3 flights of stairs and had broken both of his kneecaps. Oh shit. Sorry, man. His luck was hospitalized for 3 weeks before it was finally cleared to leave, only to trip into an open manhole and become lost in the sewer for years and eventually die from scurvy after exclusionary eating rats. On the second day, it rained. Waking up with a start as a heavy droplet of water splattered against his face, he tensed briefly before groaning as he dragged himself upright, wiping his cheek with his left hand. There wasn't any blood there, thankfully, but the droplet had still stung his cheek. He didn't know why his arm had bothered to be bandaged, but his face not. Was it just deemed not important, or maybe his arm was much worse than his face was by a significant margin? Grimacing at the thought, he moved his left arm to gently grasp his right, giving the bandages a small squeeze. Sure enough, even though the pressure was extremely light, it sent a jolt of pain spiking up his shoulder and down his back, as well as straight down his arm to the tips of his fingers. Oh shit, I felt that. This is well written. Uh, where am I? Hissing softly, he pulled his legs in closer to his chest and inched backwards, driving his back right up against the wall. He had been sleeping nearby. That had hurt. It hurt far more than the raindrop hitting his cheek. Even though he had barely even squeezed his arm, the lightest touch had caused such harsh. Once again, we're back at it again with Zack Can't Read. The lightest touch had caused such a harsh reaction. And this is a long chapter. Have mercy on my fucking soul. Of course, he had assumed the injury hidden under the bandages was bad ever since he saw the blood spotting the bandages. He wasn't any kind of medical expert, or at least not as far as he was aware, but the possibility of dying from blood loss loomed in the back of his mind. His breath caught in his throat as he gently placed a hand over his bandaged arm again, closing his eyes tightly. He could be dying right now, and there wasn't even anything he can do about it. He couldn't go to a hospital to get medical help, not if he was a wanted man, and without memories to who know who his friends were. You forgotten H. Who his friends were, he was cut off and without resources. He had nobody who could help him. Swallowing hard, he winced as the rain grew heavier and heavier, quickly going from a drizzle to an all-out downpour. Yanking his hood up to cover his head, he tucked his knees in closer to his body and hunched over on himself, curling in a tight ball to try to hide his bandaged arm and his fucking injured face from the heavy rain. The sound of individual raindrops striking the pavement quickly blurred into a rushing sound that filled his ears and blocked out other sounds. His eyes growing heavy again, he rested his forehead on his knees, letting the water soak into his sweatshirt as he slowly fell asleep again. Boom! The scream that erupted past his mouth was drained out by the loud crack of thunder overhead. Oof! Yay! Thunder and rain. I love thunder and rain. Anyway, where the fuck am I? Followed moments later by a bright flash of lightning in the air. Jerking his head up, he stared at the blackened sky above, his eyes widening in shock as another flash of lightning ripped across the sky only moments behind the first. Moving his hands to his chest, he folded in on himself, his entire body shaking. His heart pounded loud and fast, threatening to burst free with every beat. He couldn't breathe. Oh no! Breath left him in short, quick gasps as he fell over sideways, only just managing to catch himself with his left hand before his face smashed into the wet pavement. Oh, you clumsy fuck. Even as he tried, he couldn't seem to regain any of the precious lost oxygen. Wheezing and coughing, he lifted his bandaged hand to his chest as it tightened, his heart racing under his skin. Thunder raged on overhead as his cheeks burned. His entire body was hot. He couldn't see. Oh, you poor, poor, unfortunate soul. I'm sympathizing. Yeah, I'm totally sympathizing. His eyes focused on his left hand as it barely managed to keep him from outright collapsing. The edges of his vision fell away, leaving him with only a small circle he could actually make out, filled mostly by the back of his hand. In the absence of his peripheral vision, I can't believe I actually said that right. Colors flashed behind his eyes. Green, red, purple, red, blue, red, white, red, white, white. White lightning lit up the sky once more. Forcing a haggard cough past his lips. He couldn't move. This is supposed to be a serious scene and I'm messing it up. I'm fucking it up so much by not being able to fucking read. Yeet myself out the door. Closing his eyes tight, he whined, unable to move his shaking, numb body. Jerking his head upright, his vision swam before managing to focus on a metal dumpster near the other end of the alleyway. His mind latched on and pushed, trying to spur him to get up and seek shelter under the large metal container. His left arm trembled as he tried to move it forward, only for the rest of his body not to follow in suit. He fell hard, his chin smashing into the pavement. Oh, you clumsy fuck again. Tears pushed their way to the surface as he slowly dragged himself into a ball on the ground, squeezing his eyes shut and lifting his hands in a pitiful attempt to cover his ears. I know this isn't clumsiness. If many of you are being all like, it's not him being clumsy, it's him going through all this shit. Because the weather is fucked up and everything. Yeah, I'm just joking around. The storm overhead continued to churn, thunder and lightning competing for who could gather more attention from the people safely huddled within their houses. As for the red-hooded figure trembling alone in a ball on the pavement, he continued to lay there along with the storm. Lay there long after the storm had shambled along to go scare dogs in other neighborhoods. Oh, poor puppies. Waking up out of the dead sleep in a puddle, he coughed loudly, his entire body jostled with each and every wheeze. When he had fallen asleep, groaning, he pulled his aching body slowly upright, wiping water away from his cheek before looking down at himself. His red sweatshirt was completely soaked by water and his pants had not fared much better. The bandages on his arm had not suffered as badly but had still been exposed to some water. Squinting up at the sky, he blinked slowly. How long had he been asleep for? Turning his focus away from the sky, he slowly placed a stiff hand on the ground and used it to prop himself upright, stumbling to his feet. Holding his bandaged arm, he took a few shaky breaths. Everything hurt, and despite just waking up, he felt absolutely exhausted. But even more pressing than the desire to rest was a strong need for food. He was starving. Oh, fuck. Do not talk about food, because I have not eaten yet. Thank you very much. Glancing towards the start of the alleyway, he eyed the people and cars as they quickly moved by before looking down at himself. His body was soaked and he looked like an absolute mess. There was no way he was going to be able to step out onto the street without someone trying to contact either the police or the hospital. The fucking hospital. The hospital. Or either one of those situations would be terrible. After all, if the authorities managed to find him, he highly doubted that they would let him off lighter because he couldn't remember who he was. It certainly sounded like a poor defense, didn't it? I don't know who I am. Fuck. That is a very good excuse, actually. Totally perfect excuse. Sorry, officer, I know I committed terrible crimes, but I can't actually remember doing any of them, so should you really just let me keep going as I can try to find some food and water? What do you mean? That is a perfect excuse right there. That's a perfect defense. God, I need to stop talking. Yeah, that was absolutely ridiculous sounding. Even in his head, sighing, he turned away from the front of the alley, rubbing his hand against his aching right shoulder. It hadn't hurt nearly this much when he first woke up in the field, had it? Was it just the initial shock of his situation finally wearing off? Maybe he had just somehow managed to ignore the throbbing pain under his skin at first. Rubbing his shoulder, he paused for a few seconds before a tired smile forced its way up, accompanied by a sigh. No, that was dumb. Maybe he had just managed to get his hands on some painkillers previously and they had finally left his system. Glancing towards the dumpster nearby, he took a few steps forward until he was standing in front of it. It was not exactly what he wanted to do, but he had to get food from somewhere. People threw away People throw food away all the time, right? Maybe he could find a half-eaten sandwich or something and call it a day there. Why is this making me fucking hungry? It's talking about dumpster and food. Fuck. lifting one, Lifting up one arm, he grasped the edge of the lid and reluctantly forced it open a few inches. Immediately, he slammed the lid shut again and turned around, his throat tightening as a round of coughs escaped past his lips. The coughing fit degraded quickly as he doubled over, trembling as he heaved silently for a few moments. Had he actually eaten anything recently, he was positive it would have been all over the pavement, but there was nothing actually in his stomach to throw up in the first place. That didn't make the experience any less uncomfortable as he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. It took a few minutes. What's the difference? It took a few minutes before he finally stopped dry heaving and was left doubled over, tears running down his cheeks. Oh, you poor son of a bitch. Dumpster diving was a no-go. He hadn't been able to stand the horrible smell for more than a split second before his nose had picked up the scent of some kind of very expired dairy product. Okay. No. I'm not rereading that again. He hadn't actually seen whatever it was. My eyes are tearing. Not my tears are eyeing. My eyes are tearing just by reading that. Ugh. He hadn't actually seen whatever it was in there causing such a horrible mess, but at this point he was just going to forego the dumpster option. Thank you. Moving back to his puddle, he sat down beside his only possession, letting his hand rest on the gun. It was fine. He was fine. This was what? Day 2, maybe day 3. People should be able to survive without food for longer than that. He'd just think of another plan and try that tomorrow. If things had got bad, he could try the dumpster again, but he was probably better off looking elsewhere. Any food in there would probably just be crushed by the weight of the rest of the garbage. It's alright, he told himself in a whisper. Fuck. Whatever. Looking down at the gun, he carefully... Fuck. Ugh. Was not mentally prepared for this. He carefully picked it up and held it close to his chest, curling his knees in and trying to keep pressure against his protesting stomach. I'll be fine, he insisted, letting his cheek rest against the side of the gun. I can manage on my own. Sure you can. I mean, you survived a giant fucking explosion, but you don't remember that. Days passed by without much movement from the alleyway. Nobody came to clean out the dumpster, and he avoided it like it was diseased, trying to push the memory of the rancid smell out of his brain. Please don't bring that up again. That was something he wouldn't mind forgetting. Thankfully, it didn't rain again, although the sky was dangerously gray more times than he would have liked. Still, even if the thunder and lightning had not returned, it didn't mean he felt any safer. He had managed to build up the nerve to try to step out the alley on the 4th day, only to barely make it in 10 feet down the street before the flashing lights and wailing siren of an ambulance sent him scrambling back for cover. Even if it hadn't been a police car, even if it hadn't been the booming thunder, the siren was loud enough to send his heart racing and make his entire body shake as he broke down in a fit of coughing. He hadn't found any food that day either. Ah, poor you. On the 5th day, he couldn't move. It was probably the hunger, but it could have something to do with a stubborn cough he had acquired since it rained. His eyes cracked open in the morning, and every part of his body felt wickedly cold. The next time he opened his eyes, the sun was already high in the sky, though he wasn't positive when exactly he had fallen back asleep. When he finally managed to sit upright, the sun was already setting, leaving him to dizzily wonder just how many times he had woken up during the course of the day. He couldn't remember exactly through the haze, but he felt more exhausted. He spent the night trying to rest, only to jerk away by a fit of coughing every time he came close to sleep. Yes! I read that all. Not perfectly, but good. His stomach pain was joined by a tight pain in the center of his chest. Even though he did not want to be, he was awake when the sun rose on the 6th day. 6th day. I said that right. Why am I stopping then? It was a new day. The day before he had been absolute... Fuck, I was doing so well. The day before had been an absolute nightmare, and he was not hopeful things would improve very much. Leaning his back against one brick wall of the alley, he huddled inside his red hoodie. Well, he wouldn't kill for a cough drop. The pain in his stomach had mostly faded by this point, but it had only been replaced by a significantly worse cough and even worse pain in his chest. Every time he coughed, it took It didn't tuck. It shook. His body shook. It shook his entire body and made his chest tighten until he felt like he couldn't breathe at all. Even though he had tried to ignore the idea of it, it was unmistakable now. He was sick. Oh. Again, poor you. It had been the rain, right? He probably got a nasty cold from getting completely drenched in the downpour. Raising a hand to his mouth as he felt a familiar itch in his throat. He braced himself against the wall behind him as a series of loud, horrible coughs rattled his bones. Squeezing his eyes shut as the fit finally passed by, he rested his forehead on his knees, holding his chest, trying to drive the sharp pains accompanied by the coughs away. This was bad. This was very, very bad. At what point was he going to call it quits? He still knew next to nothing about who he was supposed to be, yet clearly one of those things was a criminal. If he went to a hospital, would they at least fix him up before sending him off to prison? Should he just turn himself in for whatever crime he committed in the past and hope they patched him up, or try to wait it out himself? He didn't seem much hope. He didn't seem much hope for overcoming a cold when he couldn't even find food for himself. But what other choice did he have? He was stuck in a useless alleyway with a useless gun and a useless arm. Hello? His mind was useless. Are you alright? He was useless. Feeling something on his shoulder, he jerked back quickly, nearly slamming his head into the wall behind him. Through his dizziness, he managed to make out a person standing in front of him, holding a plastic bag in one hand. Is it Ed? I'm going to assume it's Ed. But I'm not going to do any fucking accent because I'm horrible at it. Their other hand was slightly outstretched towards him, though it was quickly pulled back when he looked up at the stranger. Silence passed between them briefly before the stranger finally spoke again. Tord? I swear to God, it's Ed. If it's not Ed, it could be Tom. I don't know. He sounded uncertain, or at the very least nervous. His voice had cracked. Instead of responding immediately, he glanced down, eyeing the stranger's green hood. I knew it! I'm sorry. Stranger's green hoodie for a second before glancing up at his face and squinting. Tord? He didn't know that name. It was a name, right? Maybe it was a word he just didn't know. What? He questioned warily, his fingers curling around the edges of the broken gun he was holding. Who are you? He pressed his back up against the wall as he felt a familiar itch rise in his throat. Who was this person supposed to be? Had they seen the wanted poster? Were they going to call the police? Lifting a hand to cover his mouth and turning his head aside, he coughed loudly, his shoulders shaking with each one. The hand was on his shoulder again, and when he turned to look back at the stranger, they were kneeling in front of him with their face only inches away from his own. What are you doing? He asked, squeezing his eyes shut as a hand pressed against his forehead. Oh, that was Tord. Whoop. I'm terrible with dialogue when reading. It's okay, the stranger replied softly, their voice growing gentle. Their eyes briefly glanced down at the broken gun he was holding before looking up again. The cold hand was removed from his forehead, and the stranger gently tugged at his left arm, pulling him slowly to his feet. You can come back to my place with me. Oh. Ed's a bean, but also an asshole. His head swam as he stood, and he found himself leaning against the man's shoulder. If they hadn't been there to support him, he probably would have fallen over already. Who are you? He asked again, his voice hoarse. Well, of course it's hoarse, but I'm too lazy. Why are you helping me? They were walking forward now, or at least the stranger was. He was stumbling, trying to keep up with them, but they were careful not to walk too quickly and keep their arm tucked under his own to act as a crutch. The stranger in the green hoodie was silent for a few seconds before offering a warm smile. I'm your friend. Oh, Ed, you fucking bean. But if Ed doesn't become an asshole throughout this, I'm going to be a little disappointed. But it's still a very great fucking story. I can tell. I can't wait to get through all of it. Yeah, that's the end of chapter 3. Definitely not going on to chapter 4, because this chapter is way too long. And yeah, chapter 4 possibly next week. Let's hope next week. But yeah. Anyways, make sure to hit that like or subscribe button. They're kinky little bastards. They enjoy a good hit. Dork out.